"You're just the maid, Ruth. Don't make this about you." That's what my sister said, loud enough for my niece to hear, while standing in the house I bought, in front of the table I set. No mention of the winters I spent keeping the pipes from freezing. No nod to the loan I paid off when Mom got sick. Just, "You're the maid." And the worst part? For a while, I believed her, but something changed. And by the end of that weekend, so did everything else. If you've ever been erased in your own family's story, quietly, politely, completely, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, hold tight to that grace. Drop a 0 because some betrayals don't break the door down. They rearrange the furniture and tell you it was always that way. They say the house remembers who loves it. That morning, as I folded napkins in the shape Mom once taught me, I wondered if it still remembered me. I had to relearn the folds twice. My fingers move slower these days, and the creases didn't hold as firmly as they used to. The napkins were linen, a pale cream that matched the plates I'd taken down from the upper cupboard last week. I used Mom's old method: tri-fold, press, then tuck the corner just so. She used to narrate the steps like a cooking show host when I was little, and I'd stand beside her, my small hands mimicking hers, always one step behind. Now it was just me in the kitchen. The heater coughed itself awake, rattling a bit before settling into its rhythm. Outside, wind stirred the copper leaves across the porch. Inside, the light came in at a low angle, the kind that made everything look older and a little sadder. I inhaled the mix of lemon oil and cinnamon rolls. I'd started baking at 6 a.m., just like Mom used to before the Sunday brunches. Maybe the scent had memories too. It used to be my name on every invitation, my handwriting on the envelopes. Now, my sister's initials graced the return address stickers, bold, gold, embossed. They felt loud against the off-white paper. Elegant, I suppose, expensive, efficient. But they weren't mine. The table was nearly finished, plates aligned, glassware gleaming. I'd even ironed the runner. I allowed myself a small breath of pride before the front door creaked open without a knock. Evangeline swept in like a gust of confidence and perfume. Cashmere coat, pointed boots, her hair curled in ways that required time and effort. She dropped her bag on the church pew bench I'd refinished last fall, then tossed her coat over the antique coat rack like it was a folding chair at a flea market. "Ruth, this looks..." "Darling," she said, surveying the table like a critic assessing an understudy's dress rehearsal. "You've really outdone yourself." She smiled at me, the kind of smile that arrived late and left early. Then she began rearranging. A twist to the centerpiece, a shift to the name cards. One of them, mine, was placed at the far end of the table, near the door. "Just for flow," she said airily, not looking up. "People move better when they aren't clumped in the middle." I bit the inside of my cheek and returned to the kitchen. The silverware still needed one more polish. I hummed the song Mom used to hum, soft, forgettable, grounding. It helped. A gentle knock came not long after. Lois. She hadn't changed much. Short gray hair, thin scarf, eyes always searching the room like it held a secret. "Smells like your mother's fall brunches," she said, stepping inside. Her hand rested briefly on my forearm, warm and brief like a benediction. "Cinnamon rolls," I offered, "an orange zest coffee cake." Just like the 92 menu, she smiled. She'd be proud. Evangeline emerged with a clipboard. Brown, sleek, professional. She handed it to me with a flourish. "Staff notes," the header read. I flipped through, scanning lines of instructions. Setup, refreshments, greeting schedule. Each section had names. Most weren't family. My name was nowhere. "This," Must be the wrong copy, I said, holding it gently like something that might bruise. Oh no, she said brightly. We just had a few hands helping. Aunt Cheryl's neighbor, some of my colleagues from the gallery. You're in there, just not listed. Everyone knows it's your house. No need to over-clarify. Over-clarify. I turned the page, looked at the column marked Event Coordination. Next to it, a name I didn't recognize. Someone she brought in. I looked at the table again. Everything was just slightly different. It was still my house, my table, my napkins, my mother's recipe. But somehow I had been rearranged. Lois sat in the sunroom with her tea, watching. She didn't say anything, but she watched. She always had a way of seeing what wasn't said. In the afternoon, while refilling the sugar jar, I noticed a program by the coffee machine. Thick paper, folded neatly, printed in matte ink. Legacy Gathering, it read. Below it, hosted at the ancestral home of Evangeline Lennox. I froze. My breath didn't quite leave me, just hovered in my chest. The second line called me the event coordinator. My name, short, small, 2 lines below hers. I didn't slam the paper down. I didn't tear it. Instead, I wiped my hands on the towel by the sink and returned to the dining room. The sun had shifted, casting gold over the table. I reached out and pressed my hand flat against the wood of the kitchen table. If the house remembers, maybe someone else still does too. The name tag clipped to my sweater didn't say Ruth Lennox. It said staff. It had a little acorn graphic in the corner. Autumn-themed, I suppose. Brown text on beige paper, laminated. Probably from the same online shop that printed the programs. I must have walked past the sign-in table 3 times before someone handed it to me. No smile, no hesitation. I wore it anyway, clipped it to my cardigan like it wasn't a mistake, like it hadn't just confirmed something I'd begun to suspect weeks ago. Evangeline once called me the reliable one. I now realize she meant invisible, the one who stays behind to turn off the lights, refill the pitcher, answer the door. I told myself she needed me, but maybe she just needed someone to stand in the shadows so her spotlight felt brighter. The house buzzed around me. Voices bouncing off the old plaster walls, the scent of cinnamon replaced by perfume and cologne. People filled every room, carrying foil-covered pies, store-bought cookies, and platitudes wrapped in plastic smiles. I moved between the living room and the kitchen like a thread-sewing silence through noise. Refilling the punch bowl, replacing cocktail napkins. Someone asked, "Where's the host?" I blinked. "You mean Evangeline?" The woman, cousin by marriage, nodded, then disappeared before I could add anything else. Evangeline stood by the fireplace soon after. The same fireplace where Dad used to line up our stockings, even when we were too old to pretend. She held a glass of sparkling cider like it was champagne and thanked everyone for coming. Her voice carried. She had good projection. Legacy is not just about blood. It's about love, about choosing to honor those who came before us. There were nods, smiles, even a small clap. "I want to thank Lois," she said, gesturing toward the armchair. "Mom's best friend and a second mother to us both." Lois nodded politely, but said nothing. "And I'm proud to continue what Mom started. I was always her little miracle." I swallowed hard. No mention of me. Not my years here. Not the nights I stayed after Mom's chemo. Not the windows I sealed against winter drafts when the furnace broke and Evangeline was in Aruba. "Lucky your sister lets you stay here," someone muttered as they passed, holding a paper plate. I didn't catch who. I didn't need to. I fled to the bathroom. The mirror was too bright, one of those LED bulbs that showed every wrinkle like a roadmap. My name tag stared back at me. Staff. Not even volunteer. Just staff. Have you ever realized you were erased, one quiet detail at a time? A missing name, a half smile, a title that wasn't yours? If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, leave a comment number 8 below. Now, let's see what happened next. I sat on the edge of the tub and let the silence crowd in. Once, during a snowstorm, I spent 2 days shoveling the path so the hospice nurse could get through. Evangeline had texted, "Hope you're managing?" Sending warmth from Cabo. I remembered laughing, short, sharp, then wrapping my scarf tighter and going back outside. I stood again, washed my hands, though they weren't dirty. Outside the door, footsteps. Then a knock. It was Maya. She lingered in the hallway, one hand on the banister. 19 and already better dressed than I'd ever been. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Too fast. She tilted her head slightly, like she didn't believe me. Then she said nothing, just walked away. Back in the kitchen, I replaced the tray of hors d'oeuvres. Tiny spinach puffs, sausage bites on toothpicks. I spent the morning making them. 3 people complimented them. One man said, "The maid did a great job." He meant me. Evangeline laughed. Didn't correct him. The oven's timer went off, but I didn't move. I watched the crowd through the pass-through, saw Maya watching me again from the edge of the dining room. She looked like someone trying to solve a riddle with half the pieces missing. Later, while stacking empty dishes in the sink, I opened the drawer beneath. Inside were the spare keys, the ones we kept in case of lockouts or emergencies. They were still there, neat on the hook, glinting under the bulb. I opened the drawer beneath the sink. Inside, the spare house keys glint under the bulb. For a moment, I wonder, what if I gave them back? I didn't speak when they called me the maid. I just set the table for dessert and placed the knife handle first. It was muscle memory, really. The way Mom had shown me, knife on the right, blade inward, handle angled just slightly for ease. Even when I'm invisible, I get the details right. Outside, the wind had started its November song, tossing leaves against the window panes like small reminders that everything passes. Inside, the house hummed with a quieter kind of noise. The guests were leaving. One by one, pairs in wool coats and cousins in mismatched scarves disappeared down the walkway, waving half-hearted goodbyes. The porch light flickered behind them, and no one looked back. In the dining room, dessert plates waited. Evangeline had ordered miniature cheesecakes, gluten-free, nut-free, taste-free. I unboxed them silently, placing them on the silver-tiered stand she insisted matched the legacy aesthetic. No one thanked me for clearing the dinner dishes. No one asked if I'd like a slice. I moved through the kitchen like a breeze, heard but not seen. In the den, the fire had burned low. Embers glowed in the grate, shadows dancing along the walls. That's where I found Maya, perched on the edge of the couch, a photo album open across her knees. She looked up. "You're not in most of these," she said, her voice gentle. Not a confrontation, more like a realization voiced aloud. I walked over, sat beside her. The pages were filled with Evangeline's milestones, birthdays, recitals, graduation in cap and gown. Some had Mom's neat cursive notes in the margins. Others were blank. "There used to be more," I said. "Albums with both of us. I don't know where they went." Maya looked at me, then back at the album. She didn't press, just turned the page slowly. After she went upstairs, guest room, second door on the right, I stayed seated for a moment. The quiet stretched out around me, softer than silence, heavier than noise. Then I moved. The office still smelled like old paper and wood polish. I flipped on the desk lamp. Its yellow glow spread across the room, warming the corners. I opened the filing cabinet and reached for the middle drawer. Tax records. Each envelope was labeled by year, held together with twine. I'd kept them all: property taxes, insurance renewals, escrow adjustments. No one had asked me to. No one had to. I placed the bundles on the desk, spread out the contents: receipts from Home Depot, furnace repair invoices, mortgage payoff confirmation. My name, my signature, again and again. The doorknob turned softly. Lois stepped in, holding a white envelope. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching me organize my life into paper piles. "She left this with me," Lois said finally, her voice low. "Your mother, 2 months before she passed, said to give it to you when it felt right." She crossed the room and placed the envelope on top of the bundle labeled 2021. Her fingers lingered a moment. Then she turned and left without waiting for me to respond. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I walked to the window, watched the street for a moment. The last guests were gone. The porch was empty. For the first time all day, the house felt like it belonged to me again. I returned to the desk. Saturday slid my finger beneath the envelope's flap. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, graceful, a little faded. "Ruth, if you're reading this, it means you stayed. You always stayed. When I was too tired to ask for help, when the house felt heavier than I could manage, you were there. You kept this place alive. It's always been yours, no matter what anyone else says." I read it twice. Then again. My hand went to the drawer without thinking. I pulled it open. The keys were still there, metal cool under my fingers. I didn't pocket them, didn't hide them away. I set them on the desk, not in surrender, in preparation. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window. Somewhere upstairs, laughter, Evangeline's voice, lifted in celebration. I didn't move. Instead, I looked around the room. The stacks of paper, the faded photograph of me and Mom in the garden, the scent of lemon oil still faint in the air. I began a checklist: insurance, deed copies, emergency contacts, a list of what was truly mine, not just in memory, but on paper. I whispered to myself, let's see how she performs when she's not pretending. She called me the Maid again, this time in front of Maya. But all I heard was Mom's voice. When someone lies about you long enough, they start to believe it. Maya's head turned sharply when she heard it. Just a flick, like a bird catching something in its peripheral. I didn't flinch. I was standing by the front window, untangling the sheer curtain that had caught on the latch. The light filtering in was the kind Mom used to call story hour light, pale and cold, made you feel like the house was listening. Evangeline was brushing lint off her coat, smiling at Maya like nothing had happened. "We'll grab a bite, won't we?" "Just us girls," she said. She didn't wait for an answer. She never did. Once the door closed behind them, I turned and looked at the frame Maya had been studying, a picture of Mom, but it wasn't the woman I remembered. This one was coiffed and captioned, standing at some distant cousin's wedding. Nothing after 2015. No snapshots from the winter I stayed behind to manage her medication, or the spring I refinished the porch by hand. No photos of her in the knit cap she wore during her last months. Those pictures had vanished. I moved to the office. My breath fogged faintly near the vent. It always took longer for the heat to reach this part of the house. I opened the bottom drawer. Stacks of tax envelopes bundled by year, rubber bands hardened with time. Property deeds, payment slips, bank printouts. I pulled them out carefully, like they were pressed flowers. Each paper, a kind of memory. I found the original escrow paperwork, still bearing my signature and the notary's seal. My name, in ink. My effort, in every cent. This house wasn't a stage. It was my work, brick, beam, and breath. By late afternoon, Lois showed up again. She didn't knock. She never had to. "I found something you should see," she said, handing me a folded paper already soft at the edges. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Mom's. "She wrote this in 2021, Lois said quietly. "She told me to give it to you if things turned theatrical." I read it standing up. "The house belongs to Ruth. I've told her everything." That was all. No legalese, no elaboration. But it hit with the weight of a verdict. Have you ever held the proof that could rewrite the story, but still hesitated to speak it aloud? That quiet power, when the truth is finally in your hands. If you've been there, leave a comment number 9 below. Now, let's see what she does next. I sat at the desk, smoothing out the corners of the letter. In the hush of the house, I heard the heater rattle and settle. The kitchen clock clicked over to 3 p.m. I opened my laptop and drafted a short email to Evangeline. "Please refrain from using my likeness or name in promotional material regarding the legacy gathering. Further, this is a reminder that the property at 18 Willowridge Lane remains under my ownership, as evidenced in attached documentation. Please adjust accordingly." I attached the relevant scans and clicked send. No reply for a while. I started prepping dinner, not because I was hungry, but because routine still helped me think. I sliced carrots slowly, neatly, lined the pieces up like they were soldiers in retreat. The house was quieter without the guests. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old floorboards. At 6:43 p.m., her reply came, "You're being petty. If you're so desperate to be seen, take the keys and host your own damn fairy tale." I read it twice. Then once more, just to be sure I hadn't misread the venom dressed in satin. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked back to the office, printed Mom's handwritten note in high resolution. I retrieved the house deed. I found the photograph, one of the few that hadn't been removed, of Mom and me standing on the porch, with fresh paint still on our sleeves. Her smile, in that moment, was real. I put it beside the papers, and then I reached for the bowl on the hallway table. Inside were the spare keys, tarnished slightly from age, but still solid. I placed them on the dining table next to the documents. I folded a small note card and wrote in ink that didn't shake, "Your turn, madam." By the time she opened the envelope, half the family had already seen the truth. It was her performance against my proof. Sunday came colder than expected. The sky had that washed-out winter gray, and frost clung to the edges of the lawn like a warning. I turned up the thermostat by 3 degrees, but the chill inside wasn't from the weather. Something else had shifted. Something deeper. Inside the house, the leftover scents from yesterday's gathering, coffee, cinnamon, and floral spray, had faded into something stale. The kitchen had been cleaned, the dining room reset, but it all felt theatrical now, like we were dressing a stage after the final act. Guests began arriving slowly, each one wrapped in Sunday coats and carrying polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Their voices dipped when they crossed the threshold. I noticed how no one looked directly at me for too long. They didn't have to. Word had spread overnight. The email Lois sent, Mom's letter attached, had done more in a few hours than I had managed in years of quiet upkeep. I remained near the kitchen, my hands busy even when there was nothing left to fix. The teacups sat in their saucers like porcelain soldiers. The silver platter held nothing but reflections. Evangeline positioned herself by the fireplace, like always. She wore a navy sweater dress and a necklace I recognized from Mom's old collection, the one I thought had been missing. Her smile was brittle, a pageant smile, and her voice lifted with well-rehearsed gratitude. "This family has always stood for tradition and love," she began. "I'm so honored we could continue that today." Roy raised his glass. Water this time, not his usual mimosa. "Ruth, did you help host this again this year?" I looked at him. Just a small smile. No need for more. That's when Maya spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "I think Aunt Ruth deserves to be acknowledged." You could hear the scrape of someone setting down their fork, a cough, the shift of a chair leg. Lois unfolded the letter she'd brought in her coat pocket. Her hands trembled, but her voice was strong. "Your mother wanted Ruth to have the house. She wrote it down. She said, she was the one here every night. She paid, she stayed." The silence was heavier than any speech Evangeline had given. She blinked, then gave a hollow laugh. "She's manipulating all of you," she said, her voice cracking at the edges. "One letter doesn't rewrite everything." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into my cardigan pocket and placed a folded check on the table, beside the tray of untouched cranberry scones. It was creased from years of storage, but the bank stamp and signature remained visible. A number that matched the deed. My name, in blue ink, right beside the house address. Roy picked it up, squinted. "You paid off the mortgage?" "I did," I said simply. A cousin near the back murmured, "But I thought, didn't Evangeline say it was passed down?" "It wasn't about inheritance," I replied. "It was about responsibility." Evangeline's cheeks flushed a deep rose. "You wanted your moment, Ruth? Here it is. Take it." Then she turned on her heel and walked out of the room. The sound of her heels against the hardwood echoed down the hallway. No one moved for a while. I stood still. I could feel every eye in the room now, but not with pity, with recognition. That strange, slow realization that the version of the story they'd believed had holes, and I had quietly filled every one of them. Roy slid the check back toward me. "You know," he said softly, "I think I owe someone an apology." I didn't say anything, just nodded once. People resumed their meals in hushed tones. No one rushed to fill Evangeline's seat. A few relatives came over, asking about the house, when I'd moved back in, what renovations I'd done. They listened, really listened, maybe for the first time. Later, when most had left, I brewed a pot of chamomile the way Mom used to on cold nights. I remembered the way she'd rest her hand on mine after pouring, not saying much. "It's not about the tea," she once said. "It's about stopping time." The kitchen clock ticked softly as I carried the tray over to the counter. I spotted the staff sticker still clinging to the refrigerator door. Its corners had curled from the cold. I peeled it off slowly, gently, folded it once. Then again, then again. I opened the top drawer and tucked it beneath the box of spare tea lights and napkin rings. It didn't belong out here anymore. I turned back toward the sink, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe in my own kitchen. I thought claiming the house would feel like victory, but all I felt was quiet. A week had passed since the brunch, and snow arrived early this year. Willow Ridge looked like a postcard, frosted roofs, bare trees, and a hush that wrapped the neighborhood in stillness. Inside, the radiators clicked like a soft metronome, steady and reassuring. There was no sign of Evangeline, not her perfume in the hallway, not her voice rehearsing a speech in the mirror. Just silence, and mine to keep. I spent the morning dusting the built-in bookshelves along the den. Most of the books hadn't been touched since Mom fell ill. Their spines faded, but familiar. I pulled one out, an old cookbook with dog-eared pages, and behind it, a photo album slipped free. Not the curated one Evangeline had laid out last weekend. This was older, bound in green leather, the edges soft with age. Inside, my mother's handwriting and rows of photographs. My face smiled back from nearly every page. Me and her, me holding up paint swatches, me on the porch one Christmas with lights tangled in my hair. I hadn't seen this album in years. Maybe I'd forgotten it existed. Maybe I hadn't dared to look. I closed the book gently, my fingers lingering on the cover. A knock came at the back door. I opened it to find Maya, cheeks pink from the cold, a knit hat tugged low over her ears. "I brought a rake," she said, holding up a collapsible one. "Thought I'd help with the yard." She didn't need to. The leaves were already stiff with frost, but I nodded and let her in. We worked in silence for a while. The sun peeked out just long enough to catch the glint of ice on the lawn. She followed me to the porch, brushing her gloves together. "Can I ask you something?" she said, hesitating. "Actually, can I record you?" I raised an eyebrow. "For a class project," she explained quickly. "Or maybe not for class. Just to remember right." I stepped aside, motioned toward the den. She set up her phone on the coffee table, no fancy mic, just the voice memo app. She asked about Mom, what she was like in the mornings, what music she liked, the recipes we made together when Evangeline was off traveling. I told her about the first snow the year I bought the house, how Mom insisted on lighting the fireplace, even though it wasn't hooked up yet. She said it made the room warmer anyway, I smiled, even if only in her head. Maya laughed quietly. "Would you ever forgive Aunt Evie?" I paused, looking at the window. "Forgiveness isn't a door," I said slowly. "It's a window. You open it only when you can breathe." She didn't write that down. Just let it settle. We drank tea after, the same chamomile Mom used to brew. Maya cradled the mug like it was sacred. I told her about the night Mom gave me the spare keys, the real ones, not the polished brass Evangeline liked to display. "You don't need permission to keep what you've already paid for," she had said. Her voice still echoed in this house, somehow tucked between the walls and floorboards. I stood, walked to the drawer, and retrieved the key ring, handed it to Maya. She didn't take it, just looked at it for a long time. "This was always yours, wasn't it?" she asked. I nodded. "But now you know why." Outside, the oak tree stood naked, its limbs stark against the pale sky. I remembered planting it as a sapling with Mom one spring, both of us covered in dirt, laughing like children. Now, it looked like it had weathered 100 storms and was still standing. After Maya left, I walked the house again, barefoot on the wood floors. I found the little Christmas wreath Mom once hung on the front door. It had faded boughs and a bell that no longer rang. I dusted it off and hung it gently where it used to go, not for decoration, not for show, just for her. Later, I sat by the kitchen table, the one Evangeline once called antique, the one I called mine. I opened my notebook, the one with blank pages I'd bought years ago and never dared to write in. And finally, with the house quiet around me, I began. I opened my notebook and wrote the first line. "This house was never hers, but I was always mine." The silence after everyone left felt fuller than any applause. I walked through each room not as a victor, but as someone who had reclaimed something far older than deeds or titles, myself. I've come to believe that truth doesn't always repair what's broken, but it does offer a place to begin again, with clearer eyes and a steadier heart. Family, I've learned, is not built on performances, but on presence. the kind that lingers long after the spotlight fades. If my story echoes something in your own, perhaps take a quiet moment to remember who you were, before the edits, before the silence. And if you'd like to stay for more stories like this, you're warmly welcome to follow along. Stories of truth healing and the quiet kind of strength that changes everything. Thank you for listening.